Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Julie Doyle. The opposition's plans for industrial relations are back in the headlines, though Tony Abbott is still keeping the details under wraps. Meanwhile, Julia Gillard has used a visit to Townsville to talk about one of the government's key policies, the National Broadband Network. Joining me today to discuss the events, we have Labor MP Andrew Leigh here in Canberra and Liberal Senator Mitch Fifield in Melbourne. Now, before we get started today, though, let's hear firstly from Tony Abbott on the Coalition's plan for workers.
The one thing that the Australian workers will find is that I am their best friend. What I want to see is higher wages and more jobs. That's what I was like when I was the Workplace Relations Minister, and if the Coalition wins the next election, the workers of Australia will find that I am their best friend.
The opposition won't come clean on the detail of their workplace relations policy. The opposition won't come clean about what they do with low-paid workers who rely upon penalty rates on weekends to make ends meet. The opposition won't make clear what they do about protecting people's rosters from arbitrary change.
Mitch Fifield, to you firstly. We keep hearing the same phrases from Tony Abbott talking about returning industrial relations to the sensible middle ground and having a system based on solving problems, not ideology. But when are we going to see the real substance of the Coalition's policy in this area?
Well, you'll see it in good time before the next election. No one pretends that the industrial relations system that we have is perfect. Not even Bill Shorten pretends that. There is a review of Labor's legislation that will shortly be released. So it's not perfect. Even Heather Ridout, who isn't someone who barracks from our corner, recognises that there does need to be greater flexibility. We will have a policy for the next election. It'll be a practical policy and it will address issues that business raise, issues that business indicate make it difficult to employ people. We want to see more people employed in good jobs with good wages.
Will it be out, Mitch, in plenty of time, though, for people to see this policy and take it in?
Absolutely. The Australian public will have the opportunity to give careful consideration to our policy. But one thing is absolutely clear, and I'll say it again because I think we need to keep saying it, is that work choices is dead. There will not be a return to work choices. Even Bill Shorten accepts that. His senior advisor sent an email to journalists in June saying, sure, fair enough, the opposition aren't going to reintroduce work choices. But where there are problems, we want to see if we can find a solution.
Andrew Leigh, the government is reviewing the Fair Work Act and has acknowledged that there have been some problems. What sort of changes then can we expect from the government?
Well, Julie, we're consulting widely on the review of the Fair Work Act, but I think the balance is broadly right, and the balance ensures that workers, for example, receive penalty rates if they work on Sundays or on weekends. But what Mr Abbott told a tourism conference recently was that he believes there need to be more flexibility. Now, flexibility when you're talking to employers means to an employee that they're not entitled to receive those penalty rates for working on days which cut into family time, cut into time spent with friends. So I think the notion of penalty rates is pretty fundamental to the Australian character, and it's important in terms of us having a strong social fabric. It's important to clubs and communities being able to operate on weekends.
Well, that's the interpretation the government's put on what he said yesterday, but he didn't come out and say that he planned to cut penalty rates. He just made a statement saying that it is harder now for businesses to stay open on Sundays and public holidays and late at night.
Well, Julie, he said that he wants to introduce more flexibility, and I guess the concern I have is that Mr Abbott seems to tailor his message according to who he's speaking with. When he's speaking on a doorstop, he says he's workers' best friend. When he's speaking to a conference of employers, he says he wants to introduce more flexibility. Back at the last election, he signed a piece of paper saying work choices is dead, buried and cremated. Now it looks as though he's discovered a new taste for zombies. He seems to think that perhaps some elements of work choices ought to be reintroduced. And frankly, that's the wrong balance for Australia. Australians ought to be worried by a return to Howard-era workplace laws.
Mitch Fifield, when Tony Abbott made that speech yesterday, and he did make those comments about being harder for businesses to stay open on Sundays and public holidays, was that code for saying that we're going to cut penalty rates?
No, there was no code there. It's just a statement of fact that businesses do find it difficult often to open on weekends and after hours because of the costs that are incurred. That's just a statement of fact. We want to see if there can be greater flexibility in relation to the individual flexibility agreements. Even Heather Ridout indicates that those haven't turned out to be all that they were hoped for. So, look, we're not hung up about industrial relations. I know the government is, but we just want to take a very practical, common sense approach. If there are problems, see if there are things that can reasonably be done to fix them, to make it easier for business to hire people and to keep them, and we'll take that to the next election so everyone can have the opportunity to cast a view as to what we put forward.
When you talk about greater flexibility, though, does that mean greater flexibility for business operators that will come at the expense of workers?
Well, look, we're not in the business of taking things away from employees. That's not what we're about at all. But if there are barriers which can, reasonably and sensibly be addressed, then they should be. I don't think we're bringing an ideological approach to this. We just want to take a practical and common sense look.
Andrew Leigh, even here this afternoon, you've again talked about work choices, and the government loves doing that when it talks about the coalition and industrial relations. It always mentions work choices. Are you just running a scare campaign, though, like you accuse the opposition of doing when it comes to the carbon tax?
Not at all, Julie. I mean, this is what the coalition implemented when they were last in office.
But they've said they won't do it again, though.
Well, they've said a lot of things, and I guess the question is what they will actually do. And it is important in a country now with one of the lowest unemployment rates in the world, a country which saw no increase in the productivity growth rate under work choices, to ask what you would gain from bringing back that sort of industrial relations model. There's no clear evidence that you would get a boost in productivity from going back to the work choices era. There's very little evidence that the productivity challenge Australia faces would be solved in that way. I see it as much more an issue of education, investment in things like the national broadband network and infrastructure, and making sure that every kid has the skills they need. That's the new productivity agenda. I think the old productivity agenda is this sort of phony battle over flexibility, which Mr Abbott's been engaged in. That is not, I don't think, the high road to prosperity for Australian workers.
Well, let's move on to another subject now, and the competition watchdog has released figures today showing it's received around 630 complaints and inquiries since the carbon tax started. They describe that as a low figure. Let's hear from the Prime Minister.
If anything the opposition had said about carbon pricing was true, if one thing was true, you would have expected Australians in their millions to be ringing the ACCC and complaining. I mean, imagine if Gladstone, Whyalla and a series of other townships had been wiped off the map on the 1st of July. The ACCC would have been getting calls of complaint in the millions. We've had carbon pricing now for over a week. Around 600 odd complaints. I think the story that's telling you is how ridiculous the fear campaign's been.
Mitch Fifield, to you on this one, the ACCC says it's a low figure compared to around 8,000 general complaints they've had in the same period. Does this show that the carbon tax hasn't been the disaster that the coalition has said it would be?
No, I don't think so, because the ACCC isn't a complaints line for people who object to the fact that the government of the day broke their word. The ACCC isn't a complaints line for people who don't like the carbon tax. People phone the ACCC if they think that a business is breaking the law, if they think that a business is ripping them off. So I'm not surprised that people aren't phoning the ACCC to say they don't like the carbon tax. Where they register that is in opinion polls, and where they will register that is in the ballot box. So the government shouldn't take any comfort from the fact that the ACCC received about 600 calls.
Andrew Leigh, is Mitch Fifield right there that people aren't picking up the phone to the ACCC? That doesn't necessarily mean they're happy with the carbon tax.
Well, Julie, the broad context in which we're implementing this reform is because it's the best way to decarbonise our economy, which we know we have to do. We're the highest carbon polluters per head in the world. and because it's the cheapest and most efficient way of getting there. And I think the introduction of that carbon price has been smooth, as you would expect from a reform which is only going to cost less than a cent in a dollar, and for which compensation has been provided through big tax cuts, through substantial assistances and pensions, increases in pensions and allowances. Those changes are appropriate, and what we've done essentially is to raise the tax rate on carbon pollution and cut the tax rate on work. They're two important policy reforms, and I think they have been greeted by the Australian public with a recognition that Mr Abbott's scare campaign was hollow all along.
It does take, though, effort for someone to ring up the ACCC and complain. People often don't know where to go when they do have a complaint. So do you take comfort from these figures, or do you concede that they really don't necessarily reflect the way that the carbon tax is being viewed?
Julie, I think what I look to on this is the evidence that you see on supermarket shelves, the evidence that you see that prices have not tangibly shifted. The biggest single item that's going to be moved for consumers is electricity prices. They'll be up something around $3 a week. And household assistance on average will be about $10 a week. So there is that assistance being provided for what are going to be very modest price rises. Mitch's slightly less polished Senate colleague Barnaby Joyce was saying that the carbon price would cause a leg of lamb to cost $100 a week, to cost $100. I mean, these sorts of outlandish claims have, I think, now been shown to be utterly false. It's important. I understand that Mitch may well have a different view on policy. He's entirely entitled to that. But we have to all debate this from a position of facts and reason, not from making up scare claims as Joyce and Abbott have been doing.
And on that then, Mitch Fifield, what is your response then to what we've just heard from Andrew Leigh?
Well, I'll give a practical real-life example. Day before yesterday, I was with Sophie Mirabella visiting a business, HM Gem, who recondition engines in Dandenong. They employ about 130 people. Their electricity bill is going to go up by about $150,000 a year. That is a real life impact on a real life business, and they are going to have no option but to pass that on to their customers. So that's bad for the business, it's bad for the customers, and the person who that particular business has to thank is their local member, Mark Dreyfus QC, who is also the Parliamentary Secretary for the carbon tax. So you've got a pretty perverse situation where members of Parliament who are meant to be advocating on behalf of local businesses and advocating on behalf of local families are actually complicit in increasing business costs and increasing the cost of living for families. It's a bizarre situation.
And that's where we'll have to leave it today on that subject. Senator Mitch Fifield and Andrew Leigh, thank you both very much for joining me today.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Julie.
And join us again tomorrow at the same time for Capitol Hill.